Our third presentation, Anti-Semitism on Campuses and Education for Tolerance and Mutual Respect. We have Professor Shmuel Trigano, Ms. Michelle Whiteman, and Dr. Charles Asher Small, three people who are known, again, to all the activists who are in the middle of the fray, who are making a difference in real time, to report from the front and give us some ideas of where we might go from here in the course of the next few years. My colleague and friend, Dr. Charles Small.
So thank you, Rabbi Cooper. So first, I would like to thank Gideon and Ruth and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for putting this event together. And I'd particularly like to thank Gideon for his efforts in trying to make this global forum focus on action. I think it's very important. It seems a group of us for the last 10 years have been trying to discuss the meaning of the new contemporary anti-Semitism and what's happening and how things are unfolding. And I think we've reached a point as a group that we're beginning to try to implement action plans. And I think this is a very important approach, so thank you. So the preamble to our group states that there's a war being waged against the state of Israel. Actually, I'm going to stop. I'm sorry. I also wanted to thank Shmuel Trigano and Michelle Whiteman and the many people who participated in our workshop for all of their contributions, which is reflected in this action plan. So thank you to everybody who participated and my co-chairs. So the preamble is that there's a war being waged against the state of Israel and the Jewish people. An integral element of this war is taking place on university campuses throughout the Western world, on the campus, in the corridors of the campus, and also within the classroom or within curriculum. The university is at the front line of an ideological and global political campaign to eliminate the Jewish state by the demonization and delegitimization of its existence through the battlefield of ideas. This includes the Islamicization of Jewish and Israeli history, and this is combined with a postmodernist agenda of ending the Zionist enterprise. The recommendations are as follows. We feel that it's urgently important to enhance the Department of Anti-Semitism within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs by providing substantial resources and staff to help coordinate and combat issues of anti-Semitism. To create a single body to coordinate the struggle against anti-Semitism, and that the Israeli government should examine the political structures surrounding the academic boycott globally and the boycott movement more generally. We also recommend that it's important to investigate the international organizations and how they're being used or undermined to demonize Israel, such as the OIC, UNESCO, and other such international agencies. The group recommended strongly that the Israeli Academy, Israeli universities and institutions must engage in this issue and join colleagues from the diaspora. There's a need to support academic research and academic networks assessing anti-Semitism globally and to help coordinate these efforts more effectively and more efficiently. The group recommended that there should be research and outreach with Muslim and Arabic scholars and activists, or scholars and activists in the Muslim world, and to use perhaps places like Israel, like Europe, to bridge gaps between Israeli academics and those in the Middle East experiencing the Arab Spring, and to sort of plug into some of the democratic opposition to this reactionary Arab Spring. To provide the tools to help students gain the ability to understand and combat anti-Semitism on their campus. There is a need for students to receive greater organizational support. To combat the distortion of the Shoah in the academy, in academic research. To include and to make sure to include non-Jewish scholars in the struggle against anti-Semitism. To help improve and enhance the records, to improve methodological surveys of anti-Semitism internationally, There's a need to do research projects on following the funding of academic institutions in Europe and especially in the United States because of the free market system. Who is funding universities and what is their agenda? How do they fund programs, research projects, departments, chairs, and the like? To document the support of Islamists by Western governments and intellectuals, to promote human rights and democratic principles as an alternative to the reactionary social movement of radical Islam that is sweeping the Middle East, and to use the Western democratic principles as a way to expose the anti-Semitism, sexism, homophobia of this reactionary social movement, which is diametrically opposed to Western values. To do systematic research of the BDS movement, who's funding it, how do they enter into universities, groups like the Muslim Brotherhood, what is the relationship to the BDS campaign, and to have a detailed scientific understanding of what is going on the campuses and what is the international network of this movement. Who are they, who's funding it, and how they are implementing their programs. One of the recommendations was to name and shame. Professor Gerstenfeld was arguing correctly that there should be no free lunch, that if scholars are attacking and demonizing and dehumanizing Israel and Jewish scholars or scholars dealing with anti-Semitism, they should pay a price, and that scholars should critically examine their scholarship and look for discrepancies, footnotes that don't work, arguments that may have been plagiarized, and the like. And if one or two of these scholars are discovered, the message would be sent very clearly that if anybody wants to attack Jews, that they may run the risk of professional humiliation. There needs to be greater coordination with Jewish student groups. There's a recommendation to create a centralized body in each country for Jewish students, Jewish student organizations such as Hillel, where students can meet at a centralized conference on a regular basis and develop formalized networks as a grassroots strategy and to work with faculty in this regard. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Charles. I would also like to especially recognize someone who's had a profound effect on many generations, and I think everyone here who will be presenting a little later, Professor Huda Bauer, and to thank him for being present here this morning. So, upon reflection, I noticed that Gideon had a very brilliant move. No rabbi spoke, and as a result, we actually have time for some comments, but I would like to perhaps just suggest the context, and then we'll put it out to the floor. If there is a common denominator, at least in our session, it is the growing understanding that we're dealing with an asymmetrical war against Israel and the Jewish people. As someone who deals with companies like Facebook and Google and the rest, one of the most important tools that we need, even just in the internet area, but would absolutely apply in the other areas as well. We need to take a look and establish a coherent, straightforward, and perhaps slightly expanded definition of anti-Semitism. And so that when we come in to that meeting, we can put something on the table, and the question is whether we explicitly mention the 3 Ds. Do we include it? We know about the European Union's existing title, but I think as the challenges morph and expand, we could use the help from the academic front lines to help guide us in that area. And then secondly, also, very complicated and expanding tragically issue under the Koteret, the title of Holocaust Denial or Revisionism. Unfortunately, it has many spawning features to it. But again, when we go to Facebook, part of the challenge of trying to get all the material removed is when we come up against issues of free speech and getting, again, the guidance from the academic community to help us put forward straightforward definitions that will enable us, A, to get yes or no's in these meetings, and if we're given a no, to be able to then launch additional efforts to get the answer. At this point, I think we have one microphone in the audience? Yes. Okay. So if you'd raise your hand, and what I'd like to try to do, because I think we do have a few minutes, can we take the first three questions, and we'll try to answer them. So we've got Sammy, the young lady in the front row, and three, and Fes Parat. Okay. Yes, Sammy.
Can you hear me? Okay. Listen, in our group, we had Anita Nowinsky, which is a professor from the University of Sao Paulo, and she had her institute that had been for 10 years working in the University of Sao Paulo, closed last year after 10 years of work. I want to ask Charles, his institute at Yale was closed also a couple of years ago. Does he see a pattern of anti-Semitism in academia through this kind of closures of academic institutions?
Thank you. We'll get to Charles in a moment. And if you can come up with the mic to the first row, we'll get the second question. And if you would all identify yourselves, it would also benefit.
Okay, my name is Anne-Marie Revkolevsky, and I'm the chairman of the Aladdin Project, working a lot on Holocaust denial and anti-Semitism in the Muslim world. My question is for André and David. To stick to the English language in monitoring everything that you do, for me, you miss a lot. The only ways that we open the gates on the fight against Holocaust denial and anti-Semitism was by speaking Arabic, Farsi, and Turkish.
Thank you. Professor Parat?
My question is to the chairperson. Yeah, because you mentioned the working definition and the need to enlarge it so that it contains more elements that are relevant, etc. The working definition of the EUMC, which is a European body, was, as you very well recall, and everyone present here, was a result of a long time, many efforts, many consultations, and it is quite an achievement. It is a document that is in existence. Some accept it, some attack it, but it is a working document since 2005. I would like to challenge you or to ask you to explain more. Why should this be enlarged? Because we have enough tourists with this document as it is, okay? And the use of it as it is both use and there is also abuse. I think we should leave it at that.
Excellent question. You'll hear an answer later. May not be as good as the question, but an important one. So let's go in order. Charles, if you would restate, just remind us of the question and give your response.
So Sammy Apple asked, can you hear me? Sammy asked if the closure of the research center in Brazil and also the research center at Yale, which I was the director, these closing of the centers have anything to do with contemporary anti-Semitism. And I would say unequivocally, yes. We were running an interdisciplinary research center dealing with a focus, our basic focus was on contemporary issues. And I was basically called into the administrative office and told that if I do not deal with the Middle East, that I would be able to stay at Yale and run the center. And I stood up and shook this person's hand and I said, it's not possible to run a research center in the Middle East, ignoring an important part of the world. So I think if contemporary anti-Semitism deals with the demonization and dehumanization of Israel, and as a result of that, Jewish communities in the diaspora with a strong connection to Israel, if this is the new contemporary anti-Semitism, and there's a taboo in the universities, in the institution, the elite institutions, in the media, the elite media, in some Western governments of dealing with anti-Semitism in this post-colonial moment. It's almost a taboo to deal with those who were once colonized. If we criticize parts of the world that were once colonized, some people on the left, on the so-called left, put us in a box as being right-wing or fascist or making excuses for the Zionist enterprise and the like. So I think there's definitely, at an intellectual level, we are trying to break through a taboo, an intellectual taboo, and it is, I would say, to me, anti-Semitism. And at another level, we were speaking in our group, a year and a half after the closure of Yale, and I was fighting to keep the institute open. I was on the ground doing my best to keep the center going. It took me a year and a half later, by coincidence, that I discovered that the vice president of Yale, who framed the discussion was framed that YISA and I, as its director, was an advocate and not a scholar. Somehow I ended up they gave me a key, I created a center, and they discovered I was no longer an academic, but I was an advocate. The person who created that context of the debate was a man named Charles Hogan, who was the vice president of Yale. Interestingly, Charles Hogan, who was a roommate of Rashid Khalili, who was very close to the PLO ambassador in Washington, also worked for a pharmaceutical company in Massachusetts before coming to Yale, in which 14% was owned by the Bin Ladens, the Mufaz family, the Chebri family, people with direct links to terror organizations. This is a man that was working with these people and part of a network of funding scholars. So this is part of anti-Semitism at an intellectual level, and those of us who are struggling to create institutions, to have a voice or a foothold in the academy, we're all sort of fighting this marginalization. Some of us are on the left, some of us are on the right, but we're all being demonized as sort of this reactionary force by intellectuals. So Sami, yes, this is the struggle, an important struggle against anti-Semitism, and we have to win. We have to be on the battlefield of ideas and win the ideas. And our enemies are literally trying to push us off the battlefield.
Thank you, Charles. The second question, a very, very important one, has to do with the general focus on English and how that may be leaving very critical gaps in our entire game plan of dealing with online hate. So, David, would you like to take that one, please?
Sure. Well, of course, we realize that we have to deal with other languages besides English, and in fact, we have been trying to do so. We did, in our working group, have participants who were Dutch and following the internet in Dutch, Spanish, Italian, and French. As well, we were concerned about something that had been posted on the internet in Turkish, and before this forum we were working with Google and YouTube to take it down, and it was taken down. We do, of course, need a much more comprehensive approach linguistically. To a certain extent, we're relying, when it comes to foreign language information, on a lot more anecdotal information, and the kind of systematic approaches that we use in dealing with the English language, we have to translate into many languages. I point out here, and this is something I'll be talking about later, I mean, we are working in the context of the Global Forum, which is under the sponsorship of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and of course the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has representatives throughout the world, and even in countries where there's very small Jewish communities and foreign languages, which are very different, never mind from English, but from all European languages. And and we look forward, in the context of the Global Forum, to working with the ministry and its diplomats abroad to find out as much as possible about what's going on the internet. I would say this is an issue of which we are well aware. It's an obstacle. I mean, the internet presents us with one obstacle after another in dealing with the spread of anti-Semitism, and we're aware of it, we're trying to deal with it, and we will continue to do so.
Thank you.
Yiddish.
Thank you, David. I just would like to add that the Wiesenthal Center's just released 2013 report, which includes and focuses also on terrorism. One of our main basic findings, the red flag, is that the morphing of the online terrorism libraries, which initially were 95% in Arabic, then almost universally, eventually translated into English. We're now finding many, many other languages. But to really support your point is, in the immediate aftermath of the Toulouse murders, if you wanted to understand what was going on in France with the nature of the continuing and changing threats, what was being said on the forums, etc., English was useless. So it is clear that across the board we're going to have a much more robust team. And I think the fact that you have how many countries represented here?
More than 50.
More than 50 countries. On behalf, if I may, on behalf of the Internet team, please, if you are involved in these areas and you have language skills outside of the hey, look at English, you're needed. So please be in touch and be an immediate part of that team. Yes, Andre?
I just want to make a point that this isn't only our problem. This is a problem for the platform providers as well. The anti-Semitism language barriers are also sometimes cultural barriers. If a company has a small team of maybe 100 people dealing with the content, how many of those people are going to speak Turkish? Okay? Of those people, how many of them might actually have a proper understanding of anti-Semitism? Just to pick an example, and every company has their own team. This problem replicates across the field. So this is a challenge both for us in terms of monitoring and also for the companies in terms of recognising and responding to people's complaints. And it's a problem that must be worked on by all sides.
Thank you. So the question from Professor Parat was to the chair. And just to clarify, I think, as I made the statement, there's nothing wrong with the EU statement. If we didn't have it, we would be lost completely in the international battles. However, the real question is whether or not, because of this growing asymmetrical attack across so many different fronts, whether we may need to be more explicit in factoring in the 3Ds, especially if you're coming to a particular company, let's say talking about the boycott of Israel, the more sophisticated online boycotts, for example. Unless you could make a quick, coherent case for why that constitutes today, the way it's presented as double standard, etc., unless you can put that on the table quickly, you may not have a chance to do so. So this is not to go back to the EU or to in any way attack what has been the most important statement made. I think it even inspired the U.S. State Department. But I find in our work, especially in the last 18 months or so, that there may need to be simply a restating and a slight expansion for us, not for the international entities, but for the Jewish family as we go out and interact with others. I think we have time for 2 more questions, 1 and 2. Please, Professor.
Thank you for the upgrading. I'm not the professor. Thank you for the upgrading. I'm not the professor. My name is Joseph Pollack. I'm from the Institute of Security Analysis in Switzerland. And I would like to subscribe to everything what Asher Small said. There are already things on the way to be solved, but they have to be coordinated. And to coordinate properly, we need a guidance, we need a leader. And I believe that the State of Israel should be the leader, because the fight against anti-Semitism is also the fight against demonization and boycott against Israel. And we have to put things together. Now my question to all of you, how do we wake up the Israeli governments? Until now, it's still the same ideology, shmum, we are not concerned what the world is saying. And we won the battles, thanks God, and we have a just case, we don't need to present it. This is totally wrong. Ladies and gentlemen, even if you have a good message, we have to sell it today. We have to sell it worldwide. And if we don't do it, we lose the battle, and I'm now using a very bad word. We have to use our own propaganda. Because the other side is doing 40 years of a very stringent propaganda with a lot of money and unlimited funds. Now, I would like to ask you, how can we change the attitude of the today government in Israel, that they take things very serious, put a large budget, because the fight against anti-Semitism, I say, is the fight also against the demonization of Israel.
Thank you. And the second question, please.
Good morning. I'm Anita Bromberg, B'nai B'rith Canada. One thing that keeps coming up, I think, in the working group I was in, and certainly I think it's in common with the three presentations, is the crucial need to we heard about waking up the Israeli government, but each working group seems to be calling on getting more people, members of the public, to participate, to speak out, to object, to write in, to the media or whatnot. And it sounds obvious, that's an obvious point, but being a person that's working out in the public, I know how difficult it is to get that volume. And I'm wondering if there's been any reflection on best practices to increase awareness and particularly involvement in a real practical sense.
Do we have any Israeli citizen taxpayers on the panel? No, I'm also a taxpayer. I have 5 grandchildren here, but it doesn't count. No, seriously, I think both questions really are, in a sense, very critical question. It's a rhetorical one. And thank God we're in a democracy called the Jewish state of Israel. And I think what we'll try to do is to use the collective presence of this panel and, of course, the convening of the conference by the government of Israel to send back a message as a platform. This is a very interesting message, and it wasn't always this way, that whatever part of the political spectrum we come from, we hear in the halls here that we'd like to see a more proactive and organized leadership from the State of Israel on these issues. Not so pashut, as they say in the old vernacular, but I would say it's an unofficial kind of consensus from the various fronts that we need some better coordination. So we'll put it on that level, and we have time for one more question. Do we have anybody on this side, in the back? Yes, in the back.
Thank you. Rachel Wyman, Director of Global Education at the Dialogue Institute, Temple University, Philadelphia. I had 2 questions. If you have a 911 number on calling out anti-Semitism, BDS, or whatever we see it, if you could coordinate an international number or email or website where then you can distribute it to whoever can answer the many questions we have. I'm all the time as a university professor and as a institute that people want to coordinate or cooperate with interreligious dialogue, being bombarded by groups that want to coordinate with us that are BDS, that are Saudi Arabian, that come from many different fundamentalist groups. I'd love to have a 911 number of sort for the internet and for other places to check out who these organizations are that have very lofty titles and human rights written into its mandate and find out that they're anything but. So I would like to offer that, or question and also proposal. The second thing was about your international...
Okay, you're the last questioner, so we'll allow you. Okay, second question.
Second question.
Last question.
My suggestion or question to you, about having not just government or religious representatives, but those other human rights organizations that are not Jewish be here seeing anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial, anti-Zionism as part of their mandate too. How do we include those human rights watches and other human rights organizations to start rethinking, that also have a lot of Jews involved, but non-Jewish organizations that are human rights representations to be part of this forum in the future, or to coordinate?
Thank you, Rochelle, who's really doing fantastic work in the front lines and very unique work, including in Indonesia, Philippines, and other countries. Maybe we should go the second question first, which is there an expanded role for NGOs at the next conference, and should there be an expanded presence of non-Jews beyond the government representatives? And the two presenters last night were unbelievable, from Bulgaria and the Czech Republic. They're quite empowering. It's a kind of rhetorical question. Maybe, as you say, thank you, it's something you'll reflect on. And the first question, and if you allow me to frame it in the following way, those of us who represent Jewish organizations, and especially in the internet age, we are getting 911s from the largest addresses, like Brooklyn College, for example, in the heart of the largest Jewish community in the world, and also in smaller venues, but important and respected academic institutions where we are up against these kinds of manifestations. Is there a place for coordination? Is your group thinking about being a clearinghouse? So since we do have two of the representatives from the academic domain, Michelle and Charles, if you'd want to just reflect on that, we'd appreciate it. If you have any ideas, we'd appreciate it.
Well, just for the campus organizations, for the 911 for issues that happen on campus. So there are a variety of Jewish campus organizations, Stand With Us and Hillel, and to go to them. Those are the established structures. Certainly, it's important to go to there, and also, I think there's also a need to address the role of university administrations in demanding that campuses are a safe place for students as well. So right now, it's definitely Jewish organizations that are the go-to for issues on campus, and it should be expanded, I think, we think to include approaching university administrations and making universities accountable as well.
Thank you. Charles, last word to you.
Just as a quick point, I think there's a network or networks of scholars that are around in North America, Europe, Israel, and beyond, that if you're a scholar interested in the study of the interdisciplinary study of anti-Semitism, it's quite easy, I think, to plug in now to scholars in the field. And I'm sure you would be welcomed, and your colleagues would be welcome to participate, to do research and attend events.
Thank you. Ambassador Bahar, I return the chair to you. Thank you for the kavod.
Thank you, Rabbi Cooper, for moderating this interesting panel. I will not be long because coffee is already waiting for you outside. I do believe and I do agree that Israel should supply leadership or the leadership, I really do not know, but in the fight against anti-Semitism and also in coordination of efforts. I think that one of the main messages that you will repeatedly hear during this meeting is that there is a need for more coordination, synergy, cooperation between the Jewish communities, either in Europe, between the smaller ones and the big ones, between the Jewish communities in Europe and the very large Jewish communities of North America or Australia or in other places. So this thing, and of course between these communities and Israel, there is absolutely a need for coordination and coordinated efforts. I do believe and I do think that anti-Semitism concerns Jews, but it's not a Jewish problem. And the presence of non-Jews here is very, very important and very crucial, and it should not be the fight against anti-Semitism should not be left only in the hands of Jews or limited for Jews only. And the panel with the distinguished Muslim leaders before, just an hour ago, was an illustration for that. And we appreciate very much the contribution of these Muslim leaders who are courageous enough to come and to speak up in such a forum, and we will work also to strengthen this in the future. I have been living during my career for 9 years in Muslim countries. I've been ambassador to Senegal for 5 years and deputy ambassador in Tunisia for 4 years. And I can tell you that there are much more Muslims who have good feelings toward Israel and the Jewish people than the general feeling is. So we will work on that, and the message that also should come from this conference is a message of reconciliation, of peace and cooperation. These are the values that we want also to develop. That's why the name of the working group, for instance, on education was also not only anti-Semitism at the campuses, but also how to advance mutual respect and education. And these are really the core values that we want to advance. NGOs and civil societies are absolutely part of a struggle against anti-Semitism and for developing these valuable values that we want to advance. And they are invited. Many of you are parts of NGOs, if you want, and of the civil society.